Hi and welcome to this week's kubeadm office hours meeting for SIG Lifecycle. Today is the 30th of May, and we have a couple of things to discuss, starting with the C group driver order detection for kubeadm, so the kubelet doesn't fail on CentOS systems, for example.
So first of all, this issue is kind of everywhere if you Google about it. So it's important to know that the default driver in the Kubernetes is C group FS already. And the driver in Docker itself is also C group FS by default. So we're basically handling the case where somebody sets systemd.
Well, somebody sets systemd that isn't part of our default packages. So that's the key there. But yeah, I get that. The question I have is, it looks like, from what I can tell, it looks like the detection is always going. So like, what happens if there's a separate? Do we even need the detection if we're using a separate CRI runtime?
So in the case of a separate CRI, we do nothing right now.
I see. I expanded the logic. If config CRI socket equals blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And there's a bit of a mess in terms of other CRI because like CRI Kutl does not support it yet. So we have to I have to test it with other CRIs, and I can estimate a better way to solve it, like globally.
Yeah, if it's possible to do it without parsing the output from Docker info, that would be ideal.
Yeah, that would be best. Yes.
So I'm okay with the change. I get it now. There's definitely some details on the plumbing side of how it feeds into updates that was not clear to me at first. I had to expand everything because it was done in two parts. But otherwise, I'm good with the change, and I think it'll help a lot of people. So I'm totally cool with it. So, but we need to make sure that this matches one-to-one with the packaging update that you made, Lucas, or at least with your stubbed out version of it, because without that, it's useless.
Yeah. So so this is basically some context. Earlier, there has been a difference between what we ship, between the kubelet command line flags we ship for debs and RPMs, which is not an ideal split, but it has like worked for most of the users. So basically in the debs, we're not setting the C group driver flag so far. We've not been setting it, as Docker on Ubuntu, for example, and Debian is using the C group driver, C group FS by default. On RPM systems, though, like CentOS, the default C group driver for Docker, the default C group driver for Docker is systemd. And that has made everyone running an RPM system, the kubelet wouldn't start if we wouldn't have the C group driver equals systemd extra flag only in the RPMs. So this has been okay, kind of, but it has several drawbacks. First, like if somebody is doing systemd on the deb system, whatever deb system it might be, they're broken. If somebody the other way around is using this C group driver on the RPM system, they're broken.
Yeah.
And if somebody is using whatever system, they're also broken. And we have a difference between what we ship in debs and RPMs, which is not ideal. So that's why we want to have this.
So there's one race condition, though, with this change, in that we defaultly, I have to double check the instructions, but I could swear that we originally said we should system control start the kubelet and do in the crash looping state in the beginning. And when we drop the environment file, is part of the init process, right? So you have this, you have to do the init first before you can start. You have to do the init first, then do a systemd daemon reload, and then do a systemd start for the kubelet. That ordering has to be that order.
Yeah, and it's that kind of order inside of kubeadm. So we have this init system interface, which is currently supporting like some Windows stuff and with PowerShell and systemd. And that logic is basically exactly that. We're writing the file and we're executing a service restart using the init system interface. And
Should
then
we do actually systemctl service stop when write file and when start to make sure what it's not crash looping but actually stopped?
Sorry, what's that a question?
Well, suggestion. Maybe in the beginning of a procedure is we are forcibly stopping the kubelet, write the file, and when start it.
Well, daemon reload, then start it.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
But I get your point, and that's probably a better idea because we can't guarantee the precondition for installation if somebody already has enabled the unit file. People will go off the reservation. This is a forcing function to say always stop first, get it into a good state, then always restart it. I like that idea.
That'll be good too, because there's a difference in the defaults between Ubuntu and CentOS in that regard. Because if you install a package on Ubuntu, it'll automatically start the service, whereas on CentOS it won't.
Okay, so like just so I get it, right now we write the file, we do systemd restart kubelet, or we write the file, we do systemd daemon reload, we restart the kubelet. Is that an okay flow, or should we improve it somehow?
Improve. One thing before writing the file, kubelet stop.
Which has what effect?
We know what until we write the file, the kubelet is not trying to do something. Because you may get into race condition where like kubelet is trying to restart and it will start in the middle of file reading.
I agree with Alexander. This forces, we know the kubelet is down, and we know that we've written a unit file, and we know that because there's a precondition here that we don't know. The precondition is that we don't know the state of the kubelet when we start a init. And this forces the state of the kubelet to always be idempotent. Does that make sense? That's a pretty concise way of stating it.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense. Yeah, so it catches the thing where you have both the config file and you have the environment file loaded. Okay, I'm fine with that. I can easily update the. So I have one last PR. So this change is threefold, and the last PR is going to address that.
So can we just do that in Lubomir's PR so it's concise? So that way we know, like, we have this commit that says C group modifications. It's all there. It's all pertaining to the C group change. It's all isolated.
I don't know if it's specific to C group. It's more the like inject runtime flags to kubelets feature.
Okay, I'll allow it. God damn it, we keep on. All right, but let's bound the scope of this. But that needs to happen. It's got to be system control stop. I agree with Alexander because we don't know the preconditions and people do crazy things. So this will force the function to always be idempotent.
Yeah. Okay. So the flow is as this then. pre-flight checks. When everything there is done, stop the kubelets, write the config file, write the dynamic flag file, systemd daemon reload, systemd restart kubelet, all start.
I'm actually writing it as I'm approving Lubomir's PR, and I'm writing down that we need to do these extra steps at the end right now.
Yeah,
Lubomir,
cool.
did you want to try to wait? I didn't LGTM it yet. Do you want to wait till you go through cryo control to see if there's some magic button to further see runtime CRIs, or do you want to just go with this as it stands?
I think we should merge this for 1.11 before code freeze, and I'm going to start investigating the rest, but it's a bit of a mess in terms of other CRIs.
Okay,
So
I'm LGTM it with the details right now.
Yeah, we should LGTM it. So we talked, Lubomir and myself talked to Signode, and there's detailed information of why it can't be detected at the moment. So it's like the kubelet right now doesn't force the CRI to be running when the kubelet starts. If I remember correctly, and that means if we want to get information from the CRI runtime before we start the kubelet, we have to reverse this whole flow. Now the CRI can come later. If we want to source information there from it, we have to make it first. That's like a huge change. And then the second problem is we don't have a knob in the gRPC communication between the kubelet and the CRI to like to expose this information. So like there's two problems, and hence as it's not in the gRPC interface, it's not in CRI tool.
Okay, I approved Lubomir's PR, and I added the extra comments of what we need to do in the follow-on PR for the environment file and systemd restart Jiggery. So as soon as we get the next PR up for that one, just give me a poke.
Okay. Along a similar line, we have a thing where, so we don't know, as said yesterday, we don't know where the CRI is running locally. And we said in yesterday's SIG meeting that we might be able to patch the node API object. Tim brought up the concern that if we do so, we're not able to catch kind of the failure if somebody patches the node in a wrong manner, wrongly. So if they erase the annotations, for example, on the node API object, if they do like a replace rather than append when they should update the node. So so what do we want to use this information for? We want to use it for the upgrading process going forward, for example. So when we do upgrade, instead of doing the really hacky thing that we like download a daemon set with the image so that we know and wait for it to start so we know the image has pulled and stuff like that, we can directly go and talk to the CRI, say CRI pull this and this and this. In the same way we have pre-flight checks for the other. So, and that's one use case. We might want to use it for reset as well. But is it fair to, like, if this information is somehow lost, is it fair to just have the flag --CRI socket, and if we don't have this information, we're going to say, please specify where the CRI is running, and hope for the best? Or
I still think we can annotate if you want to do a crib thing until the node folks are happy.
Until we have something real from the node folks. That is, yes.
Until the node folks have like an actual field for the status object. I'm I think it's totally a legitimate thing to say, as I mentioned yesterday, we could annotate our cluster configuration to have a default CRI for all nodes, because the idea of mixing and matching CRIs for a cluster it's not something I've ever heard people do. I can understand somebody wanting to test these things, but it's totally legitimate to say for the purposes of initial deployment that this is a temporary fix to have some breadcrumb for us on upgrade.
Tim, for example, I am not, of course, a representative customer, like who does mix and matches, but in our case, at least we have scenarios like where most of the cluster is Docker, but few nodes is CRIO because of limitation of Docker runtime. And some people might have scenario where we use like Docker on most of the nodes, but when NVIDIA runtime for GPU nodes. So it's possible. And another concern what I had actually is regarding reset. So usually people are trying to use reset when the cluster is not operational properly. So what we are doing here, like we still need to have a detection in reset part?
So like what we could do in reset is like query the node API object using the local kubelet kubeconfig.
And if it doesn't work properly?
If it doesn't work properly, just skip. Go ahead with the rest of the thing using the Docker default Docker thing. Like everything as we do today. But like, yeah, I think that's could be a fair thing.
I don't know which is updated more frequent. I would expect a status update to always be a patch. So as we mentioned earlier, I think when I was talking, I was more concerned about any updates to the node if nodes come and go of the spec versus the status. So if the status is just an update is only patched and we have an annotation on the status for the node, we can always test it. We don't have any guarantees, but we're making a supposition that it is always a patch, which I think for status, it's a better guarantee than a spec.
So this annotation would land in the node metadata.
Yes.
So
node status metadata.
No, the node API object top level metadata annotations, because we don't have metadata on spec and status.
That would be a little more concerning.
How do you mean?
I'm just trying to think of, you'd have to query all the people that edit that thing.
So one thing I'm like really afraid of anyway is like if we can't even trust that data will be persisted in any of our like Kubernetes API resources, then it's like we're screwed anyway. To some extent, like where the kubelet is setting like the labels and stuff, and this kind of information and other subsystems like the controller manager are customizing it. If we can't rely on people doing the right thing, I feel that our system would be broken in many other ways.
It could be. But one question, you just mentioned something that I didn't think about earlier, is why can't we label it?
We can label it as well.
Because labels should always persist. There should never be a question. Because a labeling was also globally visible. So you'd say like CRI runtime, Docker versus cryo.
Yeah.
What do you think, Alexander?
Well, it might work, and actually, yeah, it might work. There is also, by the way, there is a project called Node Feature Discovery, which places the labels to the nodes based on our items. So we probably, like if we choose the label path, we probably want to have a consistent names schema with them.
So the reason I set an annotation is that it can't be used for scheduling. It's an arbitrary data store. And the labels which can be used for scheduling are way more protected from the auth perspective. So just to not get into any trouble of like, but they should be equal. Like it's both of them are just a string map, basically. So
either way at this point, I do have longevity concerns, but I don't. They could just be my delusional paranoia from being in this project for so long. So that's that could just be me at this stage of the game. So
let me try to ask a question which I tried to ask yesterday. So what's the problem to have the node config map? Like name the config map with the node name so we can easily get it. And we will have a lot of flexibility in that scenario.
We're going to have tons of config maps then. We have to manage.
So the like, it's more this kind of thing. If we can avoid one more API, we really want to do it.
Yeah, imagine you have 1,000 node cluster. You now have 1,000 separate config maps that don't have like owner refs. you'd have to owner ref those config maps all back to the nodes objects and stuff.
Well, but in reality, we need that config map only in the scenario if you have some like non-default values. So make it in the approach what, like you check if the config map is present. If it's present, then use value from where. If it's not present, then use defaults.
I guess the only hesitation I have against that is like, it's more complicated than an annotation. And if we can, and like we envision this as a workaround before getting this to be presented by the kubelet itself. So like ideally this would just be like in node status or the kubelet configuration or like whatever. Kubelet also has this status daemon endpoints. So adding one more field to the daemon endpoints tract so that like, okay, the daemon endpoints for the CRI I'm using, or CRIs if I'm like, if I want to use more than one, that the node team is envisioning as of yesterday, I heard. Then we could just like get that in a canonical way. And
so here's the conundrum. Like even if we wanted to do the annotation, you know, like I'm actually at this point kind of don't care. They all have a little bit of trade-offs, each one of those solutions, whether it be annotation, label, or config map. So I see the trade-offs for each one of these, and at this point of the game, pick one. I don't. But if you were to try to do, pick the easiest one that you can rip out, knowing that status will eventually have the actual CRI information in there. We shouldn't have to use this annotation in the future. So if we do that, and knowing that this other field is eventually going to come, the question I have is getting the reviewership to get through, because to do the formal annotation inside of the main API spec, you're going to have to go through like all the folks okaying it, right?
We don't have to do a formal thing. Like, so
you're just going to crib an annotation inside of kubeadm proper, and then like, you know, you didn't see anything.
so like on kubeadm init and join, kubeadm would just like patch the node annotation.
Yeah, I get that, but like typical process for all of the annotations inside the system go through the main API. There's a static configuration for all the annotations in the system, so it's globally discoverable. So all the annotations that exist in the system should go through should be going through the main API machinery GUI, which contains all the annotations for the system.
Yeah, it's like, then again, we have this like what is core and what is not, and we're like, we came to the point when having exactly this discussion, we came to the point that the PR had been open for a year, and nobody was doing it, or like everyone was using the label, but it wasn't recognized as core. And then as it wasn't recognized as core, we just said that, oh, well, we're gonna shoot it in the kubeadm constants instead. And
okay.
So we did, and people are vendoring it kind of from there, I think.
Okay.
So yeah, that process took like months, if half a year, if a year. So yeah, we came to the point where the release day was like, or the code freeze date was like 2 days from that day, and we just said like, okay, we have to get it into 1.6, and what are we going to do? So yeah,
this should only be an exceptional situation. You should only add the annotation if it's divergent from the default. Yes or no? I would say yes. So it should be more of an edge case than a default for most conditions.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, it's an edge case.
Okay, well then I'm cool with like duct tape and Bondo. Let's get it done. So long as we're not speccing everything out in the whole cluster with a default set of settings. But please, we need to open issues in the main repository, not just kubeadm repo, to hold the SIG node folks accountable to making sure that we can remove this history.
I have that already. I'm gonna put it in the meeting notes. There we go.
Alexander, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm okay. It was just my idea, which I wanted to like brainstorm, but I'm okay with annotations.
Yeah,
I'm okay.
That's appreciated. Yeah, definitely. But this is easier to repair.
Yeah, I'm okay with it so long as it's the exception, not the norm.
It's it's the exception. Like we're staging this kind of thing now as an annotation. If the annotation isn't there, like in future versions, when we know it should be, we can say just that, okay, we can't query this information. Please give it to me locally. So like if we can't upgrade, or if the upgrade fails with the pre-flight check, we can't pull images, because we can't detect the CRI sockets talked to. We can just say to the user like, okay, specify the CRI socket, because apparently you're not using Docker, which is the default. You're using something special, and that special value got removed from the annotation for some reason. Then just give the CRI socket. That's way better than we have now anyway, because now it's like every reset you have to specify CRI socket anyway, and every blah blah blah.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, Alexander.
Related to that, which I actually recall. So my colleague Ed Bartosz, he was trying to make a couple of fixes related to CRI socket, and after reviewing his PR, I asked him to do a bit different thing. So to create some like service function which will be able to detect properly if it's Docker, or if it's not Docker, we have specified CRI socket and we have all needed CRI tools installed. So we can have like one common code which will help us in this detection, like what we need to use, Docker or CRI tools, and use it consistently across the whole code base.
Yeah, that could probably be an improvement. I think we're in a fairly good state with Chuck's latest PR. An okay state, I said, not perfect. We still have to move over the reset code to that place. And we need, there's, as Tim pointed out, for example, in the reset code and some other places in the pre-flight checks, for example, there is next to no unit testing, which have bitten us a couple of times. At least for my part, we need unit testing before accepting like more features or whatever for that. All tracks PRs that are LGTM, like the latest days, have had proper and exhaustive unit tests, so that's good. But we still have some old code that don't. So if he could, in the same process he fixes this, could write some really good unit tests, that would be helpful.
Yeah, well, obviously,
Or
if you will change
actually
something,
a requirement.
yes, yes.
Okay. So since last week, I've coded PR refactoring all the Bootstrap token stuff, which is like a major move, I guess. Let's see. There we go. Pasted the link here. The good thing is that this looks nice for the first time in the kubeadm history. The Bootstrap token handling now. Right before this, there have been like small fragments everywhere of Bootstrap token handling. Like, oh, we stitched together ID and secret here, and here we like convert a secret object to some weird internal representation of the token, and here we have thousands of different helper methods and stuff. So now all that is unified in this PR. The thing we've been debating, and with that comes some benefits like being able to support both expiration and TTL in a token, being able to specify multiple tokens in the master configuration, being able to set description, being able to remove some old stuff, etc., etc. Again, all PRs I've done refactoring the API or improving the API are backwards compatible, or let's say we have an upgrade path for old configs. That includes this one as well. We now have this Bootstrap token struct, I call it, which has the following fields: token, TTL, expires, description, usages, and groups. This represents Bootstrap token stored as a secret in a cluster. This can be used both for authentication and the GWS flow. Then we also have one smaller type, which is just the string, the Bootstrap token string, which is 6 chars dot 16 chars. The format of the token, that is. That is wrapped in a struct, which marshals and unmarshals as the string. So when unmarshalled from YAML, it unmarshals into the struct, which has ID and secret separate. And when we marshal it again, it's gonna go back to the string, which gives us many benefits. And like now, this is handled in a proper way internally. What we've been debating is that as for all our API objects, we have one internal version and one external version. The external version has JSON tags, and the external version is the only one that can be marshaled. The internal, every time we go to JSON, every time we go to bytes, we have to go through the external version. But everything we use inside of kubeadm is using the internal version. So all utilities, everything inside of kubeadm is using the internal. And then, for example, when doing the upgrade of these configs, we can read YAML bytes from disk using the old config, the old schema like version 1 alpha 1. We decode that into the external version 1 alpha 1 structs, and then convert the version 1 alpha 1 structs into the internal type, which equals version 1 alpha 2. And when doing that, we can then, when we want to marshal this struct, we convert it as a no-op to version 1 alpha 2, the external type, and just the bytes. So that is a flow, and that's why we have two versions. So we can do upgrades of the config easily. And so we have one that has JSON tags and one that doesn't. With this, and now we're debating and thinking, how can we, because this applies to the Bootstrap token object as well, then. We would have, and Bootstrap token string object, we would have to have them both inside of the external API, which is version 1 alpha 2, and the internal version, which is as anything between our APIs duplication, as Tim pointed out. So we're thinking we could move this Bootstrap token and Bootstrap token string objects to client Go. However, as discussed with Andy today on Slack, we don't have time to do that for 1.11, because we basically need SIG API machinery review and approval, and a longer process of finding a home for this. Like, should it be in case.io/API, or should it be in client Go, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We also want to make a client for this. So that's like the state of the world. And what we're going to do now is merge this as is, which means we have some code duplication, because we need the marshal and unmarshal JSON helper functions in both places. Otherwise, the conversion won't work. But to do for 1.12 is to find a home for this and figure out how to do other things in the API machinery, like deep copy, JSON marshal, unmarshal for just one external version then of the Bootstrap token objects, or I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but yeah, that's the information there. But overall, this improves our API a lot, and also now that we have proper structs and fields and stuff, I was able to add like net new 1,000 lines of code of unit testing for the Bootstrap token flow. So that is kind of good compared to what we have today. We have something, but fairly little. Now it's like nearly 100% coverage. Any comments, concerns? That is the background, I guess.
Only comment was the description was helpful when trying to understand why you had the duplication and why you were doing an internal versus external machination around it. I still think there's some weirdness there, but I understand the explanation now. So that was helpful. Thank you.
Cool. So I guess that's it for the Bootstrap token flow. Gonna do the last polish tonight, hopefully, or tomorrow morning, fixing the verify stuff and rebasing on top of another PR. But yeah, that should be mergeable in hours. Then kubelet drop-in changes Liz asked about this today. As part of the third and final kubeadm kubelet change thing, there is going to be this Bazel deb, using the new Bazel deb drop-in file. I pasted it in the meeting notes now. So it now looks like we specify bootstrap kube config to the kubelet, which says, where is my initial kube config to talk to an API server and do the TLS bootstrap. Then kube config, when I have the bootstrap config, where am I going to write the unique identity credentials I get? And then where is the configuration I should use? And then we hook up this one file, varlib kubelet kubeadm flags.env, which gets the dynamic kubelet args that kubeadm init generates, or kubeadm join, which, for example, is this C group thing. So this, sorry,
it could be the resolved stuff too.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that is the other. So I haven't heard of. So Nadir said he wanted to do the resolve conf thing. Again, the background there is on systems like Ubuntu that use systemd resolve D, core DNS and kubeDNS both breaks. As the etc resolve conf file, local and disk, is basically a loopback. And when this is mounted into the pods, nothing good happens. And core DNS panics, I think. So it's kind of bad, because if we don't set this on all kubelets that need it, basically pointing to some run systemd whatever, I don't remember the path, but the real etc resolve conf file that exists somewhere. If we don't do this on exactly the kubelets that need it, the DNS is going to break. That's why when we can't enforce and like, okay, let's do it for every kubelet in the cluster, which is also, that is not going to work, because then you come with a CentOS node, which has a normal etc resolve conf, and well, your cluster is busted anyway. That's one of the primary motivations for why we made this kubeadm init dynamically generates kubelet flags, because we basically have to be a bit smarter than like all or nothing.
Lucas, is that a supported configuration, a non-homogeneous cluster of operating systems, I guess?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most people, if if anything, is using like whatever OS. Especially
over time as people migrate. So like you'll often see for production deployments, some person in the past picked a version of OS, and it could be the same distro, but it's so old that when you do the next iteration cycle, the flags will be totally different from what the new version is.
Cool. Sounds good to me.
So yeah, I'm gonna. Is there anyone that want to pick that up? By the way, so like when it seems to me that Nadir won't be able to do the PR in time. He volunteered like a week ago or more, and haven't shown any activity
so
yet.
This is a bug fix for 1.11.
yes.
It's a feature add.
It's a feature, yeah.
Okay. Let's say it like this: if we don't add this feature, we're gonna have a severe regression in functionality.
Well, we have a. Let's not stretch the language. We need to get it in before the weekend. How's that sound?
Yeah. That is better wording. So is there anyone so JSON has this pre-flight check that checks if systemd resolved is running. We're backporting that to 110, but I think the better way to do this in 111 is to use the same detection code, but use it later. And if we can detect this, just use a special systemd resolved resolve conf file instead of warning the user because we're fixing it anyway.
By adding a systemd unit drop-in.
No, by writing to the kubeadm generates this dynamic environment file at runtime. So appending to that string map, which will
you're changing the kubelet args.
Yeah.
You're changing the kubelet args.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what that change does. So that puts an env file still in basically the systemd drop-in sources something from etc Kubernetes, I guess.
Yeah. So the drop-in source. So I pasted in the meeting notes what a drop-in will look like. Yeah, and as Alexander commented here, I think that we should do another. So we had the discussion earlier, and I think doing etc, adding another environment file, which is etc default kubelet, is in our standard drop-in would make sense, at least to me, and say that inside of this etc default kubelet, you can do so you can set kubelet extra args or whatever.
The key part here is actually the order of these includers of environment files. So if we want to have user predefine the flags, it's one thing. Or if the user wants to redefine whatever is kubeadm wrote, when we need to have it in before or after this automatic file generated.
Yeah, you're talking about a user escape hatch for when kubeadm no longer doesn't support some configuration that they need.
Maybe, yeah.
Which does happen all the time. So I think that's necessary.
I can comment on that. So we, in our config file, in the PRs that is about to be merged, in our config file, we're going to have this .node registration .kubelet extra args field. So you can, in the config file, specify any extra argument to the kubelet. But if you still, for some reason, want to override whatever, you can do so using etc default kubelet.
Because people do whatever, they do crazy things.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
This is even we need to. I still keep on harping on this because it's super important. That we are changing a lot of things, and the only people that really understand all the details are the people that are sitting in this meeting. So we need to document the living hell out of some of this stuff because it will be confusing for a lot of people who are used to the workflow. So around it. So there will be a transition period that we're going to need to try to ease folks through.
Yeah.
The resolve thing and also the SIG group driver thing are great user experience improvements. Because
absolutely.
I've seen a lot of reports about these two specifically.
Yeah, so we have three major UX improvements in 111 with regards to kubeadm init hanging, resolve conf, or well, that doesn't make kubeadm hang, but that breaks DNS for people, so people are annoyed. The C group order detection is making kubeadm init hang on some systems, or not hang but like fail, which makes people confused. And then Docker or images not being able to be pulled, images that can't be pulled is a major one. And now that is in pre-flight checks, so if we can't pull, it's going to fail fast. Instead of waiting for a long time and people think it's hanging and blah, blah, blah.
And I think one more which needs to be mentioned is using CRI tools. In 110, it was completely broken.
Okay, yeah. I have no context on how good the interaction is in 110, but
I think we should just
the package yet for that.
I think we should just globally declare bankruptcy on 110.
That'll be in the release notes for 111. kubeadm team SIG cluster of Lifecycle declares bankruptcy and 110 support for kubeadm.
Well, we can't declare total bankruptcy because that would mean having to support upgrades across 2 versions.
yeah,
That almost
it's kind of problematic.
Support all this stuff.
We'll just say like arc backup, kubeadm init, arc restore, and we're good.
Here's your plug, your Heptio plug.
Okay, so starting to test 111. So yeah, this I'm gonna send a PR with this new drop-in for our basal builds. So like in some days when this PR is merged, you can grab the latest basal deb. We can like have a small script pinned in a document in the kubeadm repo or wherever, where we can use it for our own purposes of testing right now. That makes it easy to just fetch the deb from latest master. You have the right drop-in, you have the right kubelet, everything. You can easily test the flow.
I want to take 2 minutes to maybe get a litmus about a bug that I'm noticing. Okay. So I've been in user land deploying kubeadm Calico clusters for like the past week and a half, which is why I haven't been doing development. I'm finding a lot of bugs and user issues. A lot of them we know about already and are documented. The one that I'm most interested in, I think Jason also ran into, which is that it seems like we may have a regression in the static pod file system API, where when you change a manifest YAML, the kubelet does not always pick up the change anymore, and it will cause things to hang unless you restart the kubelet. I'm curious if this has been talked about at all.
Lee, have you seen that on any pods other than the etcd pod?
No.
So far, I've only seen it on the etcd pod.
Yeah, I've had it happening for me when I like changed the listen address on the etcd pod manifest, and only if the cluster has been running for a while is what I've kind of, my intuition is kind of showed me. Like if I change it super fast after kubeadm init is done, then never has any problems really. But if I wait a couple minutes, then like, yeah, you can't change that manifest and have the kubelet restart the etcd.
I think I saw it on the API server when I was trying to upgrade of my cluster.
What I'm finding is that this may be related to some condition that is met after the kubelet has been running for a while and is maybe contacting the API server. Because I've been seeing log messages about API server communication failures when this happens. It's really something that I don't know anything about, so that's why I wanted to bring it in front of the group. But
if you have the deets on an issue logged or cross-reference an issue and send it folks on the Slack channel, we can take a deeper dive into it.
Okay. It sounds like Jason, Alex, and I have kind of run into this a little bit, so we can probably take it offline.
Yeah, do that. I could. Sorry, please.
I believe it affects upgrades basically. So, yeah.
Yeah, I believe it could be something with the API server communication when that CD pod is gone. So then the API server hangs or something, and the kubelet hangs in turn. And like,
if the kubelet is now dependent on that interaction, then that's a serious regression in our upgrade code. So.
To me, it seems like I haven't dug into it too far, but it looks like the kubelet is checking the mirror pod through the API server, and I think there's some type of race condition that we're hitting there between, when it's trying to hit the API server to check the mirror pod versus when it's reloading that manifest.
Yeah, exactly.
I think you may be right about that, Jason. So yeah, let's chat about it later.
Okay, please do involve SIG node folks on that conversation. If you can reproduce it in some consistent form, it's a kubelet issue. So it should be filed in the Kubernetes repo, and both SIG cluster lifecycle and the SIG node should be tagged. Thank you. And just like now, cluster APIs is going to start in a minute. But just as a PSA, next kubeadm office hours is going to be a docs and test sprint. We're going to do mostly docs, but that also includes how do I test my my thing from master. So that is the plan for next week on Wednesday. Okay, that's it for this time, and see you all next week.